Here's the next project I worked on. It's a 4.5 horsepower Honda motor, Delta power washer. It sat in the garage for about 3 years. Didn't run, didn't work, and I decided to fix it. It needed a whole bunch of parts, so here's everything I ordered for it. Some of it I bought at Home Depot. Got this at Home Depot. It's a universal 25-foot quarter-inch power washer or pressure washer hose. There's the part number. It needed a new wand, so I got this at Home Depot as well. And there's the part number. All this stuff is pretty universal. It's just whether or not the part is for the engine or for the pressure washer you need to know. So it's a Honda motor, so all Honda air filters are pretty much the same. Picked one of those up at Home Depot as well. It needed a spark plug, and there's the spark plug number. Put a new one of those in. And then I also got a new pump for it. I tried a million things in the old pump, took it all apart, put it back together, couldn't figure out what was wrong with it, so I decided that it just somehow lost pressure and needed to be replaced. So I got on Amazon.com, searched for pressure washer pump. It came up with a universal 7/16 vertical drive pressure washer pump, and I'll include a link in the description, but there it is, all installed. The problem with it is that the shaft from the motor actually bottoms out in the pump before the mounts on the pump meet up with the tray up here. So I actually put in 5 washers right there in between. It's a 5/16 bolt, and took about 5 washers on there to keep it so that the shaft on the motor didn't go through the pump, or so that these arms didn't break off. You don't want to wrench it down on there and break them, but that's a common problem. I read some of the comments on the item before I purchased it and knew to look out for that beforehand. But so far the pump has worked awesome. Used it yesterday for a couple hours, didn't have any problems with it. The connections are pretty standardized as far as the threads for the hose, obviously, and then for the pressure washer hose as well. Came with a soap hookup, which is right there. That only works on low pressure mode, obviously, the way most pressure washers do. And then it came with a the thermal overload valve as well, which is right there. That comes not installed. You have to install that yourself. The bolt pattern as far as for this part is the same as this one here. This is the stock one that I couldn't get to work. There's a bolt hole there, a bolt hole there, and a bolt hole there. They aren't perfectly across from each other. You can see all 3 of them right there. It's there's one part of the triangle there that's further apart than the other ones. So as long as you have a vertical mount small engine pressure washer like this, then this should work on it. It does have the measurements on the item in case you want to look it up. One of the typical problems with pressure washers, if you figure it out, the first thing you have to do is figure out if it's an engine problem or a pressure washer problem. Obviously, if it's a no start or a hard start or something like that, then it's going to be an engine problem. But if it's as far as getting pressure out of the pressure washer problem, then it probably is the pump and not the engine. So usually when it's the pump, assuming you have good pressure out of the garden hose you have it hooked up to, then you got your in, which is labeled right there, your out, which is right there, and then you got your pressure regulation right there. If you have a low pressure problem, take that off with a wrench, and then this splits in half. This piece over here is supposed to move in to allow the pressure to come through. So I'm going to split this in half and show you guys what the problem usually is. So when you split it in half, that's what you have left. You have the one half, you have the other half, and then the spring, which with the 2 caps on each end. Those caps do come out. They're held in there by lithium grease right now. And then there's the adjustment screw, which you can adjust right there. and then there's a piece in there which is actually the same piece as this, which slides back and forth. If that piece can't slide back and forth pretty easily, then more than likely that's your problem. That needs to stay greased. So put some grease in there, some white lithium grease or some petroleum grease or something like that, silicone grease, and slide that back and forth a few times and make sure all the debris is cleaned out of there. So if your pressure washer isn't working and doesn't have good pressure, then this is a possibility. Another possibility if you're having a pressure problem is with the tip of the wand. There's these two pieces right here. It's like a little tab, and there's one on the other side. A fix for this is you can either put like a needle nose plier or screwdriver in the top of there and pry that tab out a little bit. Be careful not to break it off, but pry both of those tabs out at the same time, and then the whole shaft of this wand comes off the front. So I'm going to pull that apart and show you guys what a possibility is for a problem in there as well. So I pried those two tabs off, and then this front just comes right off like that, and that's what you have underneath there. You can see the grease that I installed on there, but that's basically what you have. Now you see that pin right there? You got to push that pin out, and then the whole rest of this plastic piece here slides out. So that's pretty much how the tip of the wand on a power washer comes apart, or this one specifically does. I'm sure all of them are very, very similar. You have the main plastic outer piece, the sleeve that goes inside it, and then this that goes over the sleeve. You can see there's a little bit of debris building up already. I've only used it for a couple hours, like I said earlier, but all this needs to be cleaned and put back together already. If you have a low pressure problem, then the possibility is right there, there's a cross hole, and then there's a hole, it's almost like a T-shape. Pressure can go out the tip there, or it can go out horizontally as well. So one problem that I had was there's an O-ring further down inside this part where it matches up from the wand and the gun part here. That O-ring actually got dry rotted and then got sucked in by the pressure, went straight down, and then got caught in the tip here. So when I took it apart, you could see a little bit of the O-ring hanging out there. So I pulled that out, fixed all the problems, didn't have any more problems after that. So as far as wand disassembly, that's pretty much all there is to it. This piece and this piece are separate. This just slides in with two O-rings on it, and then this part tightens it down to hold it on there. So the wand is pretty simple. I'm going to clean all that up with some soap and water, and then re-grease it, put it all back together. As far as engine problems with a pressure washer, probably 95% of the time it's going to be a fuel problem. Either the fuel is bad, the fuel has water in it, or the fuel is not getting to the engine for some reason. So basically the path that the fuel takes, obviously you put it in the fuel tank first. It's going to come down through this line right there that's on right now, and then it goes in a fuel line and then comes back through here and goes into the carburetor, which is hidden right back there. When it's in the carburetor, it basically goes down through a float needle. I probably have a dozen videos on how float needles work on carburetors, so check one of those out if you want a detailed example of what it could be. But there's the carburetor right there, so it goes into the float bowl and then gets sucked up through the main jet when you fire it up, and then into the engine. So there's not that many possibilities as far as it not getting fuel if the carb is clean. So if it doesn't work, first thing you should do is make sure that there's fuel in it. If there is fuel in it, you may want to dump that out and get fresh fuel from the gas station. Just because you have fuel in it doesn't mean it's good fuel. Even if it's fresh from the gas station, sometimes you could have bad fuel. Especially with these smaller engines, they're very finicky about what fuel you can put in them. With all the ethanol and the cleaners and all the stuff that they put in gas nowadays, that's extremely hard on these small engines because they're much more finicky with as far as their fuel burning. So you got your choke. Obviously, if it's cold, if the engine's cold, if it hasn't been started in that day, Then you're going to need your choke to start it. And then you got your rabbit, turtle, and off. Make sure all those are functioning well. I am going to pop off the air filter housing real quick just to show you guys what goes on underneath there. I'm not going to take the carb off or anything like that. Carbs are fairly simple, and as I mentioned, I have a ton of videos on them, so check them out if you're interested in any of that. 10mm bolts. I'm going to pop those 3 off. These 2 are long, which go through the air filter housing, through the carb, and then into the block. And then that one's just a short one that goes into this piece to hold that piece still. So I'm going to pop those off. So that's what the carb looks like. You got to pop this little line right here off the top of the airbox. That screw that I mentioned earlier, that one on the right that's shorter, screws into right there. You have this crankcase vent tube, which goes to the back of the airbox. And then you got your choke, which is right there. And then you got your governor line, which is that spring, and that right there, which basically detects when you shut off the pressure to the pressure washer so that the engine can die down and doesn't ride wide open the whole time, or doesn't run wide open the whole time. Also, as far as the connections for the choke and for the throttle, there's 2 holes in this part right here. The hole closest to me takes the governor rod, and then the governor spring goes in the hole behind that. And then the choke obviously goes in that hole right there. So take your carb apart and clean it. If you think it's a fuel issue, put fresh fuel in it. Not fresh fuel that's been sitting around in a gas can for as long as the fuel that's been in this tank is, though. So you got to get fresh gas. Just remember, decide whether it's an engine problem or a pump problem. If it's an engine problem, fresh gas, clean the carb. If it's a pump problem, then clean the tip of the wand and clean that valve on the pump that I showed you earlier. But mainly this video was just a review of that new pump. Haven't had any problems with it yet. Works great. Fit right on there other than those few washers that were needed. I also bought longer bolts. It has 2.5-inch bolts, and I bought 3-inch bolts just because it was really difficult to get those nuts threaded onto the bolt with all those washers on there. So I had to buy 5/16 3-inch bolts instead of the 5/16 2.5-inch bolts that come with it. So bought the pump, along with the pump, got all that other stuff, but it's been running great. So hope this video helped out.
So here's a little tip just at the end of my video. I decided to throw one of these on just to show you guys how to do it. Hardest part about operating a pressure washer, in my opinion, is hooking the hose up underneath there. It can be a pain sometimes. So if you buy a little rubber section of garden hose like this, these are the 3 adapters that you'll need. You'll need a 5/8 male to go into the pressure washer, and then you'll need a female for this end, along with a quick disconnect adapter. So this is the setup I have on the garden hose. Basically as an on-off switch. So if you want to switch to your power washer, your pressure washer from your garden hose, you just flip that off. Make sure there's no pressure in it. And then it's a quick disconnect. So you just pop that off. Just like that. And then hook it up to your pressure washer. Flip it on. And then you have water. And that is much, much, much easier than having to dig around under there and trying to get the threads lined up, especially with having that axle in the way like that. My only recommendation if you do this setup is to not run this on the exhaust side, because the exhaust can melt the hose. So just make sure you run it on the non-exhaust side. There's a chance that the hose could come up and touch the motor and get hot and melt, but as long as you keep an eye out for it, it'll be fine. This is a much, much easier setup, in my opinion, than trying to dig around under there. The whole setup, if you run about 4 or 5 male connectors, if you have like a sprinkler and then a regular garden hose head like that, and then a pressure washer, 1 or 2 other items, it's only about $3 per fitting. So
I think all in all I spent about 18 bucks worth of fittings between everything you see here and then a couple extras. So that's just something to look into.